So welcome everyone. If this is your first time attending our Wayside Women's Wellness Echo, welcome. A little bit about Project Echo and Wayside Recovery Center before we get started. First off, Wayside Recovery Center is a substance use disorder treatment facility. We're located in Minnesota, and we provide mental health and addiction treatment services for women, children, and families. The other part of this is Project Echo, and ECHO stands for Extension for Community Healthcare Outcomes. It's a movement to demonopolize knowledge and amplify the capacity to provide best practice care. Together, we have the Wayside Women's Wellness Echo. It's 1 hour long at noon monthly, and it's really meant to be sort of a lunch and learn style series with the goal of sharing practice and support service information, which will hopefully enable participating organizations to empower all people in recovery and empower women and families to break the cycle of addiction and trauma. So you can kind of think of this series as sort of planting the seed with hopes that you will take the information you learn and really expand on it in your own work. My name is Zora Darcourt. I'm the Director of Training at Wayside Recovery Center. And today our ECHO session is entitled Motivational Interviewing for People Who Use Drugs. Our speaker for the day is Shannon Curry-Izzo, who may look familiar to some of you because Shannon has been our speaker for the last 2 ECHOs and has presented on topics such as harm reduction and hepatitis C. Hopefully we'll get her back as well in the future. I'm working on that. So for those folks who are just joining today, maybe this is your first ECHO or you missed some of the past ECHOs with Shannon, I'd like to share a little bit of background on Shannon before I pass things over. So Shannon was born and raised in Buffalo, New York, and she completed her master's in clinical mental health counseling and began her work in harm reduction in 2013 by working in a syringe service program. It was there that she offered low threshold counseling services and eventually specialized in injection counseling and care of injection related injury. Following her presentations at the National Harm Reduction Conference in 2014, Shannon began collaborating with the NHRC as a consultant and assisted with a variety of projects, including curriculum development and technical assistance. These national collaborations were often centered on the areas of safer injecting, overdose prevention, pregnancy and drug use, infectious disease such as HIV, HCV, and STIs, medication for opioid use disorder, and other topics as well. In 2019, Shannon transitioned to the position of clinical trainer for a local CCBHC, where she took special interest in creating space to educate clinical staff on harm reduction as a movement, philosophy, community, and represented outside of her academia, something she hopes to continue working towards on a much larger scale. Shannon began working with the National Harm Reduction Coalition full-time in September of 2022 as the training and content development coordinator. And she continues to pursue the completion of her license in mental health counseling. So that's Shannon, and I'll pass things over to you.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Hello, happy Thursday. We're almost there, full Friday. I just always want to honor at the very beginning how grateful and humbled I am that you all are taking time out of your day to be here for this presentation. I know most of you, if not all of you, have extremely packed schedules. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for being here. That's me. If you ever want to reach out, I am best contacted by email. Yes, I'm one of those people. I don't do great with phones, but email is a sure way to reach me. Let's see. So let's get started. I am going to guess that a lot of the folks on this call today, motivational interviewing is something that is not brand new to you. And if you want to pop into the chat, if you want to tell me what you think your skill set is regarding motivational interviewing on a scale of 1 to 10, where do you think you are? And I kind of have it over here. So if you see me look over to my other screen, that's what's happening. Just to get an idea of where everybody is. Okay. If you've ever done extensive training, and I see a couple people already 7s and 9s, if you are those individuals, hopefully my hope for you all is to improve your existing knowledge. And I have found motivational interviewing is something that I do all the time. But I always find it beneficial to go back to basics, to those foundational skills. So that's what I'm hoping we accomplish here today, is whether you are looking to enhance your skills, you're going to be learning new skills, whatever it may be, you realize the benefit of having those foundations, those nice solid foundations. And what we're going to do today, first and foremost, I am a huge proponent of making sure all individuals practicing motivational interviewing are well aware of the spirit. Who is with me? Go ahead, put it in the chat. I find that whenever I'm educating other therapists or any other kinds of providers, when I talk about motivational interviewing, I don't hear a lot of folks talk about the spirit. And interestingly enough, the spirit and the principles of harm reduction are very much aligned. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but what the big takeaway from today should be, hopefully, is to know that importance of the spirit. We're going to talk about OARS and how you can use OARS, that acronym, to promote engagement. We're going to talk about recognizing change talk and how you can utilize a couple different tools to not only assess readiness, but understand someone's motivation to change and where their values lie. So as promised, the good old-fashioned foundations. All right, so what is motivational interviewing? Interestingly enough, the title of this presentation is Motivational Interviewing for People Who Use Drugs, and motivational interviewing was designed for folks who had problematic drinking. It was created in 1983, so it's been around almost as long as the modern harm reduction movement as we know it today. So it was created by William Miller and Stephen Ralnick. And one of the great things too, if you are not terribly familiar with motivational interviewing and its creators, they have an intensive training institute. You can do intensive motivational interviewing trainings. They are weeks long. They're, as described, very intense. The Mint Institute is incredibly generous with their materials. Motivational interviewing is very easily accessed on the internet, which is wonderful because not all creators and content developers, especially when it comes to different methodologies, are that generous. So if you simply Google motivational interviewing, it will take you to some reputable sites where you can pick up worksheets and all sorts of different things. Stephen Ralnick has his own website, and I really loved this particular quote that he has that really, I think, sums up motivational interviewing. It's noticing the language of change and encouraging folks to face uncertainty, to face the discomfort that oftentimes change brings. I don't know about you all on this call. I have a difficult time with change. If change were easy, people would get it right all the time and not have any real negative feelings about it. They'd be very decisive in decision making, and people went ebb and flow, but that's not how human beings work, because change is difficult, can be uncomfortable. So with motivational interviewing, Stephen Ralnick in particular wanted to place that emphasis on helping people express their values, helping people focus those values towards how it's supporting their dreams and how it's supporting their goals. So values clarification is going to be a really important thing when you are working with folks using motivational interviewing. Now, if you have been extensively trained in MI, I am giving you the Cliff's Notes version of what I hope folks find most impactful and most meaningful. In a nutshell, though, motivational interviewing, it is there to address, address ambivalence, not apathy. And don't make any assumptions that people know the difference between the two. So when we're talking about ambivalence, I have absolutely worked with folks who do confuse it with apathy. Apathy is that sense of, look, I don't really care. I don't know, sure, whatever, fine. I have to be here. I don't care. What do you want me to do? I'll just do it to get it over with. And I'm sure you've met those folks, right? We're talking about ambivalence, though. This is very different. I actually care very much. I care very much on this side. I care very much on this side. And how much I care might change. I might care a lot over here, but I still care a little bit over here. And again, it can ebb and flow. But we are not here when we're using motivational interviewing. We are not here to create motivation to change out of nothing. That's a really important thing to kind of keep in the back of your mind as we move forward. And it has to really be practiced with an attention to that spirit. One of the really beautiful things that Bill Miller talks about is he says, if you practice motivational interviewing without that spirit, it's like the words of a song without the music. So that is why we have to really emphasize that spirit. People who are very skilled in motivational interviewing are incredibly dangerous people if they are not practicing with attention to spirit. Why? Because it can be very easy to coerce people, to manipulate people into doing what you want them to do. And the spirit of motivational interviewing is what prevents that from happening. So again, motivational interviewing, we really have to take that assumption that the person who's sitting in front of us, there is some level of motivation that already exists. We are not there to create it from nothing. What it is not, though, it's not a catch-all. There are definitely times where motivational interviewing would not really be recommended. Somebody mentioned in a previous training when I did this, I asked for examples of when motivational interviewing might not be advised. And somebody said, well, if somebody just lost a loved one, absolutely, this is not the time for motivational interviewing. Why? Because there's really not a decision that they're trying to make. There might be times where people are struggling with making a decision, such as, do I forgive this person who hurt me? That is a decision that that person is trying to make. Motivational interviewing, though, is probably not going to be the best way to go about helping that person make that decision. That's not to say that you can't take some pieces of it, though. Values clarification, what's important to that person, those are all pieces that you can take and use as needed. But we just have to be careful that we're not using motivational interviewing for quite literally anything that comes into our office. It's really helpful with folks who have health concerns. What's going on in terms of, do you want to, what's stopping you from making this behavior change that would help you be healthier or take your medications more consistently? But it is, again, not that catch-all. It's not arguing with somebody that they have a problem that has to be changed and addressed. And this can be difficult, I've noticed, when talking with providers that often work with mandated clients, because sometimes mandated clients will tell you that there is no problem. We might say, well, you know what, according to all of the negative consequences, it would suggest that there is a problem happening. But if that person is very much, no, I don't think that there's a problem, there's actually no point in arguing it. Nobody wins a power struggle. There are other ways that you can go about working with that person and using motivational interviewing. What does that person want to work on? What is important to them that they would like to change? It's also not telling somebody what to do or telling them what would be best for them without actively encouraging that person to make their own choices and to be informed about the choices that they make. We don't take that expert authoritarian stance. We don't look down on people and say, again, that I know what's best for you. Clearly you have a problem or else you wouldn't be here, so I'm here to help you fix it. We are working with folks as a collaborator, as a partner. We also don't do the majority of the talking. I don't think counselors and providers should be doing the majority of the talking anyway, but sometimes it happens. Be mindful of how much space you are taking, though, and giving ample opportunity for that person to feel safe enough to talk about whatever it is they feel they need to talk through. And again, it is not coercive or punitive. Here is kind of a good way to assess whether or not motivational interviewing is going to be the right fit for somebody you're working with. First one, when that ambivalence is high. So when somebody really feels stuck between making some decisions, they feel strongly on both ends of the spectrum. Here comes MI. It's also helpful when people don't always think that they can accomplish something. They're not really sure how that would look for them. They haven't been successful in the past. Do I think I really can? I don't know if I'm capable of making that decision or if I'm capable of withstanding the consequences if I engage in this behavior change. So that's another really great situation for MI. Also, when somebody is having a very low desire, maybe they're uncertain of wanting to make that change because they simply don't want to. They don't want to put in the effort that it would take. They don't want to make the financial commitment. They don't want to make the time commitment, whatever it may be. But that desire to make the change is pretty low. That doesn't mean it's non-existent. That doesn't mean that no motivation exists. It just means that the desire is low. It's not the top priority. And that brings us to importance. So sometimes when people think, maybe I'd like to make this change, I don't know, it's just not at the top of my list right now. I've got a lot of other things going on. And this is, again, another opportunity where we can kind of step in and offer some clarification of goals, some clarification around values, and what this person is actually trying to accomplish with this potential behavior change. I always like to involve in presentations folks who are instrumental in whatever methodology or whatever philosophy or any movement that I'm talking about. So here's an excerpt of Stephen Rollnick. So he is, again, one of the co-creators of motivational interviewing. And I thought this was a really lovely, very concise summation of motivational interviewing. So we're going to go ahead with that. It's about a minute long.
Denial and resistance in people, if you think about that I went through, is not a property of the pathology of the individual, okay, but says something about the relationship. My 15-year-old lies to me consistently, but not to his best friend. Do you see the point? Yeah, okay, so, but you know what I'm saying. You've got to be very careful. And what Miller and I shared then and now is that if you shift your style, this is the basic observation, the motivation to change improves in front of your eyes. And that shift in style is not just a technical matter, it's your attitude towards this person. And so associated with that style shift is a whole lot of things that you saw in Conversation B, which we'll have a look at in a moment. Again, but I think which can be captured by this. Try not to judge, try not to blame, try not to label the person. Try and be respectful, reflective, as your colleagues have said. And the motivation to change can come from within them. They have the energy and the motivation and the good sense to change inside them, and much of the capacity and skills to make change happen if you give them the space to do that. And that's a very different approach to what I saw in that addiction treatment unit, and Miller had noticed in addiction treatment settings in the United States, where his stories were the equivalent of mine. I mean, there were some stories that he told me and still tells me that truly make me shocked.
So one of the reasons that I really like that clip is he does talk about, and he starts out by saying lying and deceit, that's not necessarily inherent in the folks that we're working with. And that's absolutely been my experience. One of the things that I've noticed is at the beginning, Zora had mentioned I worked in a syringe service program and I was a counselor there. And I was providing counseling services for folks while I was also still in school and still working with a lot of different peers who were just starting their journeys at different behavioral health clinics. And early on, I noticed how they spoke about their clients, the frustration that was in their voice, why are they always lying? Why don't they just tell me the truth? And the revolving door and all these different things. And I really thought about what is so different about my setting that doesn't really happen. Folks come and tell me a lot of really interesting things that I know they're not telling their other counselors. So what's going on? And I think it has a lot to do with the relationship, that when they walked into the syringe service program, I wasn't necessarily looked at as a provider. So it was a very privileged position. I didn't have a clock that I was watching, have to watch clocks now. It's really hard, right? But the partnership, the collaboration that I was able to enjoy with folks in that space was incredible. And not many people have that option when you're working with folks who are coming in who might have already had some very negative experiences before even meeting you. A lot of folks too who use substances, not all, but a lot of folks, especially if their use has been chaotic or there's been some really negative consequences to their life, when they do come in for treatment or when they do come in for any kind of engagement, a lot of those survival-based behaviors like being secretive, not being forthcoming with information, being distrustful. It takes a long time for those behaviors to kind of fall by the wayside. A lot of those behaviors have served and continue to serve folks. And just from a survival standpoint, having to choose really quickly or having to make a decision really quickly. Are you safe? Are you going to hurt me? Are you going to give me what I need? Are you going to take advantage of me? So it can be a very chaotic way to live that builds a lot of these almost hypervigilant behaviors that then carry through in a very negative way. It's nothing personal. Oftentimes it has to do, in my experience, it has to do with the fear of, well, if I tell you the truth, are you going to judge me? Because I don't think I can risk the look on your face. I don't think I can risk you looking at me with pity. I don't think I can risk that. So I'd rather just lie because I don't want to handle how you might receive this information. Anyone here who has ever worked with folks who have experienced a trauma? How many of you, and I'm getting chills thinking about this because this literally just happened not long ago to me. How many of you have worked with somebody who said, I don't know that I want to tell you what happened because I know it's that bad? People withhold things all the time for different reasons. And much like Stephen Rolnick had mentioned, his 15-year-old lies. And why? Because he's a parent. It's that authoritarian kind of, you are my kid. You are supposed to do as I say. And think about how that permeates into the behavioral health, the therapeutic, the provider world too. That power differential, no matter how much we hope to dismantle it, no matter how much we work to dismantle it, doesn't change the fact that folks coming in, they're not aware of the work that we're trying to do. They're only aware of their experience right now and the experiences that they've had before. So it can take a really long time to rebuild that trust. Please just keep that in the back of your mind, that it's most people's motivation is not to make you look stupid. It's not to hurt you personally. It's self-preservation, it's historical distrust, and it's relearning how to engage in healthy behaviors and let go of the ones that served a purpose and might no longer serve the same one. So when we're talking about key qualities, motivational interviewing, it's that guiding style of communication. We listen, we offer information, and we give advice when it is indicated. We're not giving unsolicited advice that, well, if I were you, this is what I would do. If it comes up and we have information to offer that person, absolutely, but we're not offering unsolicited advice. We also want to empower folks to change, to meet their goals by looking at what's important to them, by looking at what do they think their capacity is for engaging in this behavior-related change. And we're always approaching folks from a standpoint of respect and being curious. I always encourage people to think about compassionate curiosity versus cultural tourism. And if you heard me in previous sessions, I've talked about this before, but if you're new to this, and I think it's always a good reminder, compassionate curiosity is that I am asking you a question because it is relevant for me to ask, versus the cultural tourism, which is, why would you do that? Wait, hold on a second. You did what? I've never heard of anybody doing that. Tell me, so what? Okay, so why would you do that? And it might seem silly to see me do it here in a somewhat exaggerated way. And I've also seen people do that in actual sessions and talk about their interactions with folks who are engaging in behaviors that that person is deeply unfamiliar with. We really want to approach everyone with respect, humility. The drug using community is a distinct culture. It's one of the few things that few things that SAMHSA did do right, including the drug using community and its cultural competency tip 59, I think it is. So get to know folks from that cultural humility standpoint, and you are going to be aligned with motivational interviewing spirit. We also, again, we don't give unsolicited advice. We don't want to confront either. We do something called developing discrepancy, which is kind of caring confrontation, but we're not sitting here saying, all right, listen, I know you lied to me, so what's the deal? That's not what's happening. It's also not something that we use to coerce people into change, to making them see things from our perspective because we perceive them to have a problem. And to do that, it really does take a lot of self-discipline on the side of the provider, because you have to honor that person's full autonomy, which includes that individual's right to not change when needed, when they feel it's not needed. Nicole, I really love what you said, cultural humility partner with cultural competence. So Sam says, I think the tip is cultural competence. I'm hoping that they'll up that to cultural humility. So here's fingers crossed, right to your local SAMHSA people. I don't know how that works. So submit comments. And motivational interviewing is very much entrenched in helping to promote self-efficacy. I always laugh that this is literally on every gym that I've ever donated funds to in terms of a membership. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. That is very much self-efficacy in a nutshell. Think about this too for folks that might have engaged in treatment over and over and over again. And you've probably seen or worked with folks who said, yeah, I could teach this group at this point. That tells me that this is a person who doesn't feel like there's a lot that they have left to learn and that they're not really going to grow from this. So the sense of self-efficacy is pretty low. If a person doesn't think that they can accomplish something, they're probably not going to be able to. We have to believe in ourselves. It's a core kind of concept that is rooted in any type of positive behavior change. We have to believe that we actually can. And I want you to think about this, because another thing that motivational interviewing, if you've done the more intensive trainings, they often ask, Rolnick and Miller often ask in their training sessions for people to reflect on their own experiences, because it's through reflecting on our own experiences that we can truly connect to how we're treating others. So I do want to encourage you to think about the different types of changes that you've tried to make in your life and what's holding you back from it. So I kind of made a joke. This is a quote that's on every gym I've ever donated a membership to. If I were to join a gym tomorrow, I got to tell you, I'm not going to feel very optimistic about it. Why? Because I'm consistently not successful doing it. I might still try thinking, hey, maybe this is the one. But at the end of the day, if I'm really honest with myself, I don't really think I'm going to be successful in that environment. Now, here's the thing. That requires a lot of introspection and being honest with oneself. And that's also part of motivational interviewing, is we want to encourage people to have those hard conversations with themselves, with their own spirits. It's also, we are looking to look at how people feel they can engage with different obstacles, how they can cope with setbacks, and how they can succeed despite all of that. And the spirit I referenced before, the spirit of motivational interviewing, really kind of rests on several tenets. We have partnership, acceptance, evocation, and compassion. And ultimately, what that all means is we are treating the individual that we are working with as a partner, as a collaborator. They are in the driver's seat. We are there to provide information as needed. We are there to help with clarification. We are there to help with some guardrails. But at the end of the day, that person is the one who is in charge of what's happening. We respect people as they are. We respect the right not to change, that right to self-direct. We want to acknowledge all of their strengths and efforts, and we want to take that active interest in understanding somebody's experience, that authentic, accurate empathy. And when it comes to getting into that spirit, again, we want everybody to feel as though they, as the client, and us as the providers, we want our clients, our consumers, our patients, however you conceptualize folks, we want that we believe they have everything needed already within them. It's already there. We are there simply to help them discover it and refine it. So we have to look at how they conceptualize their world, what their perception of the problem is, what their goals are, and what their values are. And if you ever want to know why somebody is not meeting their goals, do a little digging into what their value system is. Because oftentimes, and I'm not saying that about this group, I'm saying just kind of my experience in general, I have seen a lot of providers become very frustrated because people aren't meeting, quote, their goals. The problem is that for a lot of people coming through the system, this is not their first time. So tends to be an expectation of what my goals, quote, should be. my goal should be this. Or I've seen therapists also say, well, okay, so you're here for substance use disorder. So let's talk about some of your goals. What are we thinking about treatment? So inadvertently, they're already leading them in a direction that is not what that person is actually identifying. So again, it takes a lot of self-discipline on the side of the counselor, but if you want to know why somebody is not meeting their goals, start looking into what their values are. And we're going to do some really cool work with that in a minute. And again, accepting the right not to change. Clinical principles. The big ones that I'm going to talk about in a second, we're going to hold off, but with regards to avoiding argumentation, I think we all kind of know that that is a futile effort, right? We're not here to argue with people. Nobody wins a power struggle. Even if you think you did win a power struggle, you didn't. Nobody wins a power struggle. The moment you feel internally, your heart's beating, your adrenaline might be pumping a little bit and you're getting frustrated, ask yourself if you're engaging in a power struggle. And if you are, just drop the rope. Drop the rope. Drop the rope, shift focus. So yeah, and then of course we've talked about supporting self-efficacy, but let's actually look at expressing empathy. Be empathetic authentically. Find something about that person that you can connect with. There was a peer once that brought it to my attention. I could never figure out for myself why I personally did not like when people would say to me, oh my gosh, I know exactly what you're going through. Oh my gosh, I've been there. I know what you're going through. Because in my mind, I think you actually don't, because I'm me. And my experience is mine. And it was a peer who told me I could use this, by the way, I have permission, who really helped kind of clarify something a lot better. And that spoke to me much more authentically. And her approach was, she would say, I don't know what I haven't been in your shoes, but I have been in the same shoe store. And that really resonated because it was a way of honoring a shared experience and allowing that person the dignity of their own narrative. Because that's what we really want. We want people to have the dignity of their own narrative, not for us to dictate it, not for somebody else, not for a peer. You are in control of your own narrative. You have the agency to make change on your own, not to look for somebody else to do it for you. So if you can't identify with, maybe you're somebody who's never touched a drug in your life, that's okay. There's a lot about drug use, the feelings that go into that, the feelings of loneliness, shame, isolation, fear, that you probably can connect with. And those are the pieces that you really want to lean into, because that's where you find your empathy. And if you think folks can't tell the difference between if you're faking being authentically empathetic, they can. They probably won't call you out on it, but they can. So the other one I want to kind of talk briefly about is developing discrepancy. And if anyone here has, and I'm sure you all have, there's a few folks I know who are pretty experts here with motivational interviewing. When somebody has that aha moment because that discrepancy has come to light, that is just chef's kiss. It's incredible to watch it happen. Am I right? Somebody put in the chat. It's very cool when it happens. Because sometimes people just need things reflected back to them to see it happening in real time. What they're saying and what they're feeling just aren't matching up in real time. And you've had that happen too. I think very non-clinical version of that is sometimes the aha moment, where you realize actually what I want is not going to happen by doing what I've been doing. We might know it, human beings, on a peripheral level, but to really lean into it and have that moment where your words are coming back at you and you're feeling it at this visceral level is very, very, it's an amazing space to hold with somebody. So there's different ways you can do this. So, all right, so you're doing this. How actually does that fit in with your stated goal? Or on one hand, you're saying that this is important to you, yet you're continuing to do this. Can you help me understand what's motivating that? And it's not that direct confrontation. You truly are just highlighting two different things that the person has already identified. And when it comes to rolling with resistance, people by nature have trouble with change. We've already talked about that. and resistance is part of the change process. So go with it. Accept that people will ebb and flow, and that can be okay. There might be times where you have to shift focus. You're getting to that point maybe with somebody who's just kind of throwing up a bunch of sustained talk indicators. So sustained talk and change talk, we'll talk about change talk much more, but that sustained talk is all the different words and phrases that they're using that are telling you that this is a change that they're not really interested at this moment in making. So it could look like this. Maybe Zora tells me, Zora's asking me, all right, Shannon, so you're telling me that you want to be healthier for your kids. And at the same time, I know you're really concerned that your blood work came back that you have high cholesterol. Can you help me, understand, what's stopping you from going to the gym? And I say, you know what, Zora, like, I get it. I get that there's all these different things happening and I have to worry about my blood work and I really want to be there for my kids. And I just can't seem to get to the gym and I don't want to prioritize it. Because honestly, it's just financially, it's draining. I'm just so busy. I have all these other things going. And right now, it's just not at the top of my priority list. Yes, I want to be healthier. It's just not something I can do right now. And Zora might kind of step back. And I think a lot of us have been there where we might start trying to problem solve in real time. But the reality is I just threw a whole bunch of sustained talk out. And I have kind of dropped my rope. You could step back and say, all right, let's do a little bit more values clarification. Let's find out what's actually going on. And you might kind of pivot away from motivational interviewing. But if I keep up with this line, one of two things is going to happen. One, I'm just going to agree with Zora because I like her and she's nice and I want to keep this good relationship. And let's be honest, clients do that, right? Or I just say, you know what, I'm just not going to engage in this anymore. So we have to be really careful with this. Roll with resistance. It's okay for people to push back a little bit. In fact, I might actually say, I think it's a good thing when people start to push back because it's starting to show that there's a level of discomfort and discomfort comes with change, which means that they are trying to engage in that behavior related change on some level. And when it comes to OARS, this is a really great way of engaging with folks. It's because in behavioral health and public health, we love our acronyms, don't we? So we're going to do OARS, and this is really just open-ended questions, affirmations, reflective listening, and summaries. And this is really a great structure on how to conduct sessions with folks. You can do very effective sessions in a very short amount of time. And I have clients that I'm still doing motivational interviewing with months later on just different things and clarifying because there's some really big decisions that they're trying to make. When it comes to open-ended questions, these are your standard ways to kind of offer that line of questioning, and also be mindful of how often you are using the same phrases. So my kind of go-to is, tell me a little bit about, that's my go-to. And I have to be very mindful to mix it up a little bit. So can you describe to me, or when this happens, what are you thinking? And if you're watching me right now, you can see probably I'm struggling to even come up with examples because that's how few times I mix it up. So get used to mixing up your lines of how you open dialogue with folks so that it doesn't get to be redundant. And when it comes to affirmations, I'm sure many of you are familiar with affirmations. The big thing that I want to drive home with this, though, in particular, affirmations is not everybody gets a cookie time. So what I mean by that is affirmations have to be meaningful to the person. They have to be authentic. Please resist any low-hanging fruit. And I'm quite sure I probably don't have to say this, but I'm going to anyway, just in case. If you are thinking about offering an affirmation and it comes out something like, well, at least you, don't say it. Anytime a statement is led with, well, at least you, it's probably not going to be received well. I'm not going to say it's going to be received badly because I am not every person and I don't share every single person's perspective, but for a majority of people, it doesn't always land very well. So with affirmations, make sure that they are meaningful to the person and they are actually calling out the specific change that that person has made, no matter how little it is, but it has to be meaningful to that person. So there's some examples here, but let's say I was running late to work and I tell my supervisor, oh my gosh, you know, it was just such a day today. I don't know how I managed to pull it together. The kids were everywhere. Somebody was doing this. The dog was sick. Traffic was terrible. I just need a minute because this was just the most frustrating morning ever. And I'm somebody who has never been late for work a day since I've been employed. If my supervisor were to look at me and say, you know what, it sounds like you had a really rough morning, but you know what, you made it here on time. It's not really going to mean a whole lot to me, because that's something that I consistently do. It's nothing of progress. What could be a positive statement is, you know what, that sounds like you had a real time. And I'm noticing that you are not chugging your coffee like you usually do, which we all know makes you sick later. So that's awesome. I mean, that's a very informal way of offering an affirmation that is meaningful, because it might actually cause me to step back and say, do it without guzzling a ginormous coffee and getting sick later and asking myself why. So affirmations, we really want it to be meaningful to that person. And reflective listening, this is not parroting. And reflective listening can be such an incredible way to engage with folks in terms of making sure that you really understood what they were saying and that they are accurately expressing themselves. And this can be where you often see that discrepancy starting to develop. So somebody might say, it was such a frustrating morning today and my blood pressure was all over the place. And I just, it's just making me realize just how out of shape I am running up these stairs. And Zora might be listening to me saying, interesting. Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is you really wish that you were in better shape, because running around is something that is just taxing on you and it's really starting to drain your energy. And I might say, yeah, that is absolutely true. Or I might say, I don't know, it's not really what's going on. I think I just need to really work on my time management. Yeah, I know I need to work out and get in better shape, but really this is a time management issue. It's okay to be wrong with reflections, because it offers a person an opportunity to clarify themselves. And if I were to say, yeah, you know what, Zora, that's a really good point. I really do need to work on this. I can't be running up these stairs. I'm 40. My knees are not the same as they used to be. That could be something that maybe Zora files away in her mental filing cabinet and highlights later. Shannon, you mentioned that you really wanted, you really value being on time and you really value playing with your kids. And, but it's been really hard for you to get to the gym and not really work on improving your overall wellness, which you identified would probably help you be more on time and would help you be a better parent. Help me understand what's going on here. So sometimes those discrepancies don't happen in the moment, they happen with other techniques, but you can remember it and reflect on it later. And summaries are a really great way to make sure that you have fully understood what happened in the session and that perspective is shared with the person that you're working with. So what we don't want happening, I don't think any provider wants happening, is you think one thing happened in the session and the person you're working with has a completely different perspective of what just happened. So the summary can make sure that you are on the same, you're on that same wavelength, that person is able to correct anything that maybe you missed. And if you're doing it at the end of session, summaries can happen throughout a session, but if you're doing it especially at the end, give yourself a little bit of time, a little bit of padding, because this is a very effective way of avoiding, not completely, because it still can happen, but it's a great way to avoid what sometimes turns into, oh my gosh, Zora, thank you so much for talking to me and helping me sort through this, because I've just been having a day. My mother died and I've just been having a really rough time. And you have 3 minutes left in your session. Has that ever happened to somebody? I'm sure it's happened to the best of us. It's happened to me before, for sure. So doing a summary is a really great way of, and you might not be able to avoid some of those things that happen. Sometimes it's just unavoidable. And this can be a great way of making sure that you understand what happened in the session the same way that the person you're working with has. And it kind of is that nice kind of soft ending to your session that transitions that person out of your office, out of the appointment, whatever it may be, in a kind, soft-handed way, as opposed to abruptly jarring where they've just disclosed something really big and you're not able to be fully present with them for whatever reason. So when it comes to recognizing change talk, I mentioned before, we love a good acronym, right? So let's talk some darn cat. These are really great ways to assess where somebody is in terms of their readiness to change. We want to see a combination of all of this because unfortunately, wanting something does not make it so. People can say they want to do something 30 times a day, but if they don't actually do it, nothing's going to happen. So that's why we want that combination. We want people to have combination of words like, I would like to, I want to, I would wish. Also words that say that they think they can actually do it. Anytime you can get reasons in there too, why that person thinks that change should occur is great, because we don't want change to be this nebulous thing that people are thinking, well, yeah, I know I should lose a ton of weight, but that's just such an arbitrary kind of very loose objective for somebody to have. So we'd like that to get a little bit more like, what specifically do you want to change and why do you want that change to happen? Need statements are also very helpful. One of the interesting ways you can use language is this actually happened to me. I had a supervisor that I was talking to, and I said, I know that I need to do this, and I got to do this, and I have to do this. I know I need to do it. And she looks at me and she says, you said a lot of need to, have to, ought to, but never once have I heard you say that you wanted to. And that was my aha moment where I just thought, oh my goodness, I don't want to actually. But I also had the safety and the permission, the person that I was talking to created that space where I felt like I could say that. Because sometimes people think that they want something, and when push comes to shove, actually thinking about that change, maybe that's not actually what's going on. It might be something completely different. A piece of this, we want to look at that person's level of commitment. How ready are they to take action, and what have they done? Because if you have that darn piece, but that cat piece is missing, it's still an idea. It's still a want, it's a wish, it's a desire, it's a sense of urgency, but there's no actual pieces that are moving to make that goal happen. So you want to see a combination of that. Listen to the words that people use. Now, when it comes to tools to assess readiness, here is a really easy one. Again, you can get it right off the internet. It's the decisional balance worksheet, and this probably looks very familiar to most of you. I have to say, for as much as I do motivational interviewing, I have to consistently remind myself that this exists because I don't always use it. I might verbalize it, I might write it down, but having an actual sheet can be really helpful because it is more than a pros and cons list. It's that pros and cons for why somebody might want to stay the same or reasons why staying the same might not be great. And also, what's going to happen if I change this behavior? It would be inauthentic of us to recognize that the change somebody wants to make might actually come with consequences that they are not prepared for. So we have to really lean into that. One of the best examples I can think of for this specifically is I've had folks who have been on housing wait lists for years. They finally get stably housed, and then within a month, it's gone. Why? Because that person had something to lose and didn't know how to set themselves up for success. And this happens so much, unfortunately, where people are so focused on reaching a goal and making certain changes that they don't often think about what they might be giving up. So yes, being stably housed sounds amazing. Yes, it's awesome. It's my own space. I'll be safe. And how am I going to cope with the isolation? What happens if and this is a real story, what happens if I find an abandoned cat that suddenly I bond with, but I can't bring it back to my apartment and I don't know where to put it, and I haven't felt a heartbeat or anything give me affection in God knows how long? That's a really hard thing. And I actually know somebody who lost their housing because they rescued a cat that was thrown out of a window. And it was the first like living thing that they felt connected to. And it was something that looked so small. But we had never really thought through preparing this person for stable housing outside of, look at all the good things that are going to happen. We have to look at some of those consequences that might not be so great so we can help people cope ahead. Importance scale. So I'm going to do these in tandem. So we have the importance and the confidence scale. I often hear people say, all right, well, how important are you, is this to you? How willing are you to do this? But not often pairing it with how confident are you that you can actually do this? And watch what happens when there's a discrepancy there. It does happen, I think, a lot more than people realize. I might be very, very willing to do something. I might be very willing to go to the hospital because I have a skin and soft tissue infection and it's starting to streak and I'm not feeling so hot. So I might be very willing to go to the hospital. Scale of 1 to 10, I'm an 8. Great. How confident are you you'll actually be able to do that? What do you mean? Well, how likely do you think it is that you're going to be successful doing that? Well, I mean, I'm going to go. All right. How are you going to get there? I'm going to call someone, right? Who are you going to call? And insert obvious joke there, Ghostbusters. Somebody had to do it. But I might say, okay, so who are you going to call? Well, I'm going to call my boyfriend. All right, well, why don't you call them now to make sure that they're there? And so when you leave my office, that they're going to have time and all those, those different logistics that sometimes people don't think about. So that person might initially have a high level of, yes, I can do this. And that pause button of having somebody think through it can offer some really valuable information. And you might see person is very willing to do something. They might feel it's very, very important, but not feel as though they can. And the can piece is something that providers oftentimes can many different options and tools to help people through. We just don't always ask. And oh, good. I'm so glad I left myself some time for this because this is my favorite exercise ever. How many of you have done a value card sort? So you can scan the QR code. And I'm smiling so hard with this because this is what I did with my folks. So this is used with permission. This is something that I used to have in my office. It's a list of about 83 different cards. There's blank ones. There's a mobile option, so you can do it on your phone. I like the tangible things. So I had a couple different sets that I had laminated. Thank you, Stephanie, our old admin. But what I would do is I would give people an opportunity to kind of tell me what they valued and why is this important. So this is a true story that happened years ago. I often had an interesting position of when folks were not being, quote, compliant with their medication, they would come sit with me. It was often kind of like going to the principal's office. And I tried to do, make it as the best experience I possibly could. And there was one person who came in and said, so the NP said, you got to talk to her. She's doing some like not great things. And what do you mean not great things? So this person presented with very, very revealing clothing. They were very overly affectionate with people in the waiting area. They were often with their much older partner too. And they were trying to engage in treatment because there was an open CPS case. So the whole point of this was to try and get custody back of their child. So I remember I sat down and this person was not really willing to talk to me at first. And the second session, I said, why don't we just like play a game? Tell me what's important to you. Like, what do you think is important? So interestingly enough, this is not hers, but hers was, and I wish I had taken a picture of it because on the very important side was independence, autonomy, travel, adventure. Nowhere on here was family, love, romance, sex, which was completely opposite of how she was kind of like being presented to me as a client. Because I kind of leaned into this and I'm like, tell me more about this, adventure, what kind of adventures have you been on? Long story short, she had been groomed from a very early age, and she was behaving in the way that her partner wanted her to behave. She did not want to be a parent. So even though she was supposedly trying to get her child back, she was not being, quote, compliant with her medication. Nobody could understand why. Here's why. This is why. Because in her mind, and this came out long after we were working with each other, but in her mind, she never got to be a kid, and she wanted that back. She wanted her time to be a kid. She wanted her time to go see the world. She had never been outside of her town. I mean, Buffalo's pretty small. So it was a really eye-opening situation for me. It had a somewhat happy resolution, but what it did was it helped me understand her better. And that, I think, improved a lot of our interactions moving forward. And it helped me see the benefit in doing this with other people. And there's been some really cool things that have happened as a result. So here's one that I did. Here's another one that I did. I would have like some fun with it too. And I'd say, what were your values before treatment? What were they after treatment? And take pictures of it and save it for people so that they could even see how their values changed. Just remember, nobody is completely unmotivated. We all have our own hopes and dreams. I had a supervisor who once said that they really didn't like when people said things like they're being resistant. They said, I prefer the term reluctant, because if they were resistant, they wouldn't be here. And I always really liked that idea that by virtue of the fact that they are engaging with you, that they took those steps to come through your doors, something is there. Something's there. And we want people to feel as though we are uplifting their own motivation, looking at their own reasons for doing things. And then we want to connect any of those behavior changes that they're looking to make. We want them to show how it aligns with their values, how it's supported with their values, maybe clarify values along the way. Not everybody knows what their values are. And if something isn't sitting right with us, going back to how does this align with our values can be a really strong starting place. And also, if you're a provider, detaching from outcomes, because I know our funders would, roll over if they saw that I actually had this in print, but detach from outcomes. Give people the space to buck. There's a really great YouTube video. If you look up, oh my goodness, I can't even remember the name of it. I'll send it to Zora if you want. But it's a really good motivational interviewing video, and it shows this man who is like corralling a horse. And he talks about how, in the olden days, we used to break the horse's spirit. We used to whip them into submission. We used to isolate them from their herds. And now, if we give them space to just buck, let them feel things out. The horse eventually realizes that they don't have to, because you're giving them the space to do it. It's when we constrain people and we try and conform them to what we want that people buck or they buckle down. We don't want either. We don't want any breaking spirits, and we don't want any rage-fueled bucking. We want people to be their most authentic selves. All I have for you folks. I really hope that no matter what level of expertise you had, that you're hopefully taking away maybe a little bit rejuvenation, a little bit of validation of what you've already been doing, maybe some new tricks. Pull out the value card sort. It's amazing. I promise I don't get paid to say that. I should though. I don't know. But I appreciate you all so very much. Thanks for being here. Go raise some hell, change the world.
Thank you so much, Shannon. I also really love the value activity. And we always get so much from your presentation. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm going to stop.